camera one.
Any of them?
If you're just joining us,
right.
Just kidding.
If you're just tuning in, we're going live from Art Form Foundation's page. My name is Ebony Easley. I'm the founder and executive artistic director for Art Form Foundation. I am super, super excited to be here with Alex and with the guests that we have here in the audience.
Thank you. Full house tonight.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
To launch our first ever community art talk. This is a very important element of our programming because we want to make sure that we're uplifting, affirming, increasing the career pipeline for Black and brown artists here in Tulsa, and be able to celebrate their work and really understand the professional side of art in our community. And that's really not celebrated and uplifted and poured into with resources. So Art Forms, we want to kind of step up and create that space for our artists here in town. So our first one kicking it off is Alexander. If everyone can give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
He's going to share just some wonderful, wonderful information about his background and his process, and it's just really a treat to really get an inside view to someone who's so spectacular that we have a gym here in our city. So I'm going to pass it over to Alex and our labor to get us started for this wonderful and impactful conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you, friends. And those of you joining us on the internets, my name is Alexander Tamahn. I am a lot of things, but chiefly among them is really, really excited and honored to hold space with you all today, to talk a little bit about some things that I know pretty well, pretty intimately, because they are my lived experience. So I guess we can just dive right in. It'll be pretty informal, pretty conversational. I guess we'll hold space for questions at the end. I'm not super familiar with the format, but I think it's pretty lax. But if you have a burning question that must be answered and interjected in the midst of this, by all means, chime right in, sound off. Shall we kick it with the slides? Shout out to Tatiana, my lovely assistant in all of this, navigating the slides that we have for you. This first image is not me, but does actually represent, I think, my emotional climate right now. I'm pretty confident, pretty smug in this experience. I have worked a long time. I know they say for every overnight success, there's 10 years of hard work that you don't see, and that's pretty accurate. As a Tulsa transplant, I am originally from Fort Worth, Texas. Grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. I have worked a great deal to curate a life that I don't have to retreat from, one that really kind of nurtures and sustains me in a way that marries who I am and who I understand myself to be with what I do, which I believe is a very a beautiful thing. I have the pleasure of holding space with people from all different walks of life in my travels and in my work, and not everybody, is living a life that they thoroughly enjoy and affords them the space and opportunity to breathe when they need to breathe, and to chill and to just kind of process and synthesize all the things that they're kind of taking in, and move through them as those experiences move through them. I feel really, really blessed. We can keep it going because it gets creepier the more I look at it. That guy right there, shout out to him. I am really proud and hoping that I'm making him proud. That's little Alex. As you can see, not a whole lot has changed, except for maybe the hair's gotten a little longer. The style was very much styling. Through no fault of my own, because obviously the adults in my life were definitely curating all the looks. And I appreciate them. I stand and speak their name. I prioritize nurturing my inner child, and have done so for quite a bit. I think many of us, everyone, I navigated a great deal of trauma, some wild experiences that have definitely shaped me in a lot of ways. my background, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but my background is actually in adolescent addictions counseling, which was not something that I planned on going into in terms of like entering the workforce and like choosing a career and things of that nature. It was definitely something that I believe my creator had a very nuanced hand in terms of the path that I've kind of like navigated to get here and the trajectory that I'm on. That being said, growing up with some of the experiences that I had, like I knew that for one, the adults in my life, like while they were kind of propped up as these like sovereign and all-knowing, infallible like entities, something about that at my big old age of like 6 was like, nah, y'all don't actually really know, I think, all the things. And there were like realities wherein like I wasn't always kept safe, and I think experiencing a lot of those things obviously like definitely like informed my outlook on life, the way I interacted with other like kids and adults and whatnot. Like I had a lot of like social anxiety growing up. I was very shy, very timid, but was also quick to open up when I felt safe enough to do so. Like very much like, if you're ready for this, you know what I'm saying? Like this is a party. But I was very private and very protective of the party, as it were. I grew up, again, a lot of trauma, but primarily at that point in my life in Chicago, which was a place that I think growing up I definitely kind of like took for granted to certain extents, especially the exposure to art in so many brilliant capacities. Art and culture were definitely part of my like upbringing through a lot of intention from the adults in my life. I grew up in a middle to like upper middle class like black household where it was important that regardless of what I was exposed to or what we were taught in like the formal education space, like I knew about my history, I knew about my family's history, like where we come from, our capacity for greatness, our responsibility to one another, all those different things. And so growing up, excuse me, in a place like Chicago where there's so much access and so much just inspiration and real like access, even, and this is like in the 90s and stuff, 90s and early 2000s, like even then, it's only enhanced and shifted, but even then I feel it was all pretty like fortuitous and really impactful. It's definitely informed my work now as I have moved to public art being a real like major tenet in my practice. I think it's something that's super important for all of us to have access to and to engage with and to experience. As like a latchkey kid, getting home before my single mom and being responsible of like helping my little brother, helping kind of like co-parent him and make sure that, you know, the chicken was thawed out, the dishes and stuff were done, all the things before my mom got home. The city landscape I took in consciously at times, but by and large subconsciously, a great deal of art from all different lenses and perspectives. And there was one thing that I think, like, so as I mentioned before, I grew up in Chicago and Michigan. When I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I was like in the suburbs. So it was very, very different, bit of a culture shock versus, you know, being like right off of the lake in Chicago and relying on public transportation that gave me a degree of like access and agency to just like go and experience like all these different things that, you know, were being obviously like curated on like an institutional level. But I didn't have that, so I experienced a great deal of like culture shock going from just like Chicago to Michigan. or the area that I was in. But I remember just how, for one, I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, so having showed like a proclivity towards art at a pretty early age, that was something that was definitely like nurtured by the adults in my life, but it was also, I think there were things that they also kind of projected onto me, just in terms of, you know, you can be as creative and brilliant as all get out, but, you know, as a little black boy coming up in the world, like, we also want you to be able to like thrive and take care of yourself. And it wasn't communicated to me that like art was a vehicle for me to achieve that, right? So it's like, yes, you're talented, yeah, you're great and all that, but like get a real job kind of thing. And maybe like this pathway, like you'll always kind of have art as a means to express yourself or, you know, do what have you, but like we need you to be like self-sufficient. And so I definitely like internalized art not being a means of true like self-sufficiency, but it was also something that I relied on extremely heavily in terms of catharsis and just in terms of even outside of like stress relief, like just like self-soothing. Like I've recently kind of like read a little bit on just the shifts that are happening culturally within our younger like generations that are now, you know, children in like early adolescence, and just how they're not used to like being bored and just being able to just like chill and being like left to their like own devices. Like that's actually like a problem. And so I remember, you know, regardless of needing art and needing to like work with my hands to like decompress and relieve stress and things like that, just being okay with being by myself and the TV not necessarily being on, like art was major for me. Like I could be left to my own devices, and I was quite a bit. My younger brother, Julian, has Charge syndrome, and so that is a chromosomal disorder similar to like Downs. It is an acronym for just like the different, I guess, maladies, so to speak, that are associated with it. I won't go into like a whole bunch of detail, but he was born in 1989, and it was, I think, only started to be like published in medical journals around like 84, 85. So it was relatively like unknown and not something that, you know, was just kind of like accessible in mainstream in terms of like literature and understanding like the necessary like services and just kind of how to like navigate, right? So again, single mom, shouldering all of that and, you know, navigating that, there were quite a few times when I was, you know, quite literally left to my own devices because my, you know, sibling had like therapy or, you know, different things that required his and my mom's like presence. So I bounced around between my like biological family, my mom and like my biological dad, and living with my grandparents for like a few like years while my parents were like navigating like divorce and just like a whole bunch of stuff. Very grateful now, I think, for the ways in which the adults in my life, although, you know, turns out they were fallible, turns out they didn't have it all figured out, turns out they were just kind of like doing the best that they could with the circumstances that they were dealt with, had enough insight and understanding to provide me with as much like stability as possible. So despite the culture shock of like going back and forth between Chicago and Michigan, which I literally went back and forth. Like I, again, was born in Texas and would spend like summers and holidays down there quite a bit. But I did like pre-K through first grade in Chicago, second grade through fourth grade in Michigan, fifth grade and all of junior high back in Chicago, back in Michigan for high school. Like, so there's a lot of like back and forth, a lot of trauma, I guess, and just in, you know, having to move and like, you know, I'm gone for a couple years and like really like important friendships and those dynamics had shifted. So yet another reason for me to be like able to self-soothe and to kind of like navigate and cope effectively. And that happened to be through art. So junior high is kind of trash for most of us. think just about everybody, like, just not the best time between, like, hormones, aging, like, all the things. It's just a very awkward time, and I did that in Catholic school in Chicago, which I think only added to the tumult of it all. That being said, that's kind of when I really began to blossom, I think, as an artist. I had a very interesting relationship with my art teachers around that time. We butt heads, like, a lot. And they definitely, one in particular stands out, and I should probably, like, reach out to her if she's even, still with us. Hopefully she is, but she and I, like, we were not cool. And it was really because, like, so in the counseling space, one of the things that, like, I understand is that, and this goes, like, across the board, but oftentimes we have the experience, we have the empirical data before we have the language to support that and to articulate that. So there was a lot that I had an understanding of and a recognition of, like, I can intuitively, like, find my way through art making and understand the nuance of these different media, because, in elementary and junior high, like, you're thrown pastels and watercolors and acrylics and tempera, and you're doing mosaics with tile, like, all these different things, and yet there are through lines in terms of understanding shape and line and value. Even early understandings of, like, color harmony and things like that. Like, I got that. Like, I could, find my way through that. But as an instructor, her responsibility was, to make sure that I had an understanding, a firmer grasp on the techniques and the technical aspects of things, that I was just like, okay. You're not going to tell me I can't do this, like, with these medium. And she did. Like, oftentimes, like, there was an assignment and there were expectations, and I understood those objective expectations. However, they didn't necessarily always honor creativity as much as, like, we were sold. Like, we were told that, this is art and that we're supposed to have fun creating and doing all these different things. But then I felt, like, really, really boxed in and confined to very tight parameters that I was assessed on, which didn't necessarily seem to align with my skill and capacity. Like, I know that I'm actually dope at this. And I understand that, like, the quality of my work, like, I'm pouring myself into this in ways that my peers just aren't. And that's okay. Everybody doesn't, this was back in the time when everybody didn't get a trophy. And it wasn't just like everybody's great for, participating. Yeah, it was like, no, some of us are actually excelling in this particular, like, space, and that's okay. I recognize that, but there was just so much dissonance, and there was just like, this isn't this isn't giving what I know this is supposed to give, because did you see what I just did? Why are you not, like, nurturing me in this moment and supporting me in all these different things? Like, you're just telling me that this is it's somehow incorrect, or that this isn't actually the way that this can be done. But that, I think just kind of contributes to all of the unlearning that we navigate as we get older and as we mature, and, all the things. But I digress. Despite our beef and the tension that existed in our relationship, she really did see my potential, because she would submit some of my work to, like, art contests and, like, adjudicated, events and things that she wasn't necessarily including everybody on. And that was affirming and very, like, validating. And it's like, okay, so maybe we don't always get along within, like, the classroom setting, but she held space for me outside of that and believed in me and ushered me into that space. That being said, I didn't still feel like art was, like, the path, right? It was like, this is great, this is an awesome outlet. It's still being treated and presented to me as an extracurricular. Extracurricular meaning, like, this is outside of like the actual curriculum that I need to be, like, focusing on and eking some sort of, like, pathway with. And I kind of, like, went with that. There's something to be said of us all wanting to be seen and wanting to display our value, and art, particularly design, was definitely a means for me to be exceptional and a means for me to get attention, because I was like not, and I know, oftentimes whatever is effective is what we apply in terms of coping mechanisms and in terms of, again, getting those needs met, which is why sometimes like negative attention is still attention, and so sometimes people, default to acting out to receive that attention. That wasn't for me. So any way that I could present myself or an extension of myself in an exceptional way was something that I definitely like leaned into. So as I matriculated through junior high, again in Catholic school, we wore uniforms all the time, so I had very few opportunities to stand out in terms of how I dress and all of that. But when I did, for spirit weeks and stuff like that, I would start to design my own clothes and customize them and do all the things, which has definitely been one of my moves. And just kind of a superpower that has only, I think, been refined and leaned on as I, keep doing this thing. That definitely became a means for me to better navigate the weird social mores of high school. I was the new kid, because again, I was moving back and forth, so people didn't necessarily know me, but they could appreciate my sense of style and the way that I kind of use that as a bit of a security blanket. And then that also became a means for me to become a little bit more enterprising in terms of customizing my own clothes, and then other people being like, yo, where'd you get that? I'm like, oh, I made it, and they're like, oh, okay, well, can you make me something similar? And I'm like, I might, still navigating some things, but did finally see that as an avenue to really test the waters, in terms of really leaning into a design and a creative means of self-sustenance. I also started doing studying kind of concurrently, taking master classes and workshops at the local art college up in Michigan. That was, I think, when I started seeing more accessible and more realistic pathways in art, which, again, representation matters. And even though the people that stood as beacons of hope for me weren't necessarily black, weren't necessarily queer, weren't, necessarily checking all the boxes in terms of my intersectional identities and experiences, they were just not corporate 9-to-5s, and they just seemed more fun. Two gentlemen in Eric Whalen and Yad Matsumura were some of my first really inspirational art instructors, and they were just figuring it out. They kind of had this cool opportunity to teach these cool classes and things, but it was a very your art teachers are usually, most of the time, are pretty chill, pretty cool, pretty vibey people, and they were the archetypal cool art teachers, where it's yeah, we're learning cool techniques and things, but I was just so enamored by their experience. I'm you lived in Japan for however many years, and you illustrated and animated on these really, really cool projects and publications that I know. You know what I mean? And so that was really, really inspiring. And that I think it was something that I just kind of clung to. Again, striving for exceptionalism and striving to be great. I was in a workshop and master classes with other kids that were all really great, and they were all kind of the all-stars in their respective school districts and whatnot. So it was cool to be in a specialized group where we're all special, but we all have very different strengths, and all of them are being celebrated, and we're not necessarily being pitted against each other. None of our projects and the curriculum was, we weren't guided through it, and nor was it stewarded in a way where, even though it was objective, there wasn't this culture of who is better and who has like a more more substantial claim to this just based on like their raw talent or on how receptive they are to our tutelage. Like, that was important for me, and that's been something that even as I've moved into adulthood and taught art classes, done counseling, all these different things, like I I carry a lot of the lessons and a lot of like the really, really impactful experiences into my work, specifically with young people, but then also like anybody that perceives themselves as somehow distanced from art and somehow not creative, not capable of being an artist. I wholeheartedly ascribe to Joseph Beuys's subscription to social sculpture, and that basically being a more broad and extended definition of art, asserting that we are all artists and that we are all capable of art and capable of creating like really, really masterful things. I don't want to get into like too much detail about like the systems of oppression that have been so deeply ingrained in all of us that we other ourselves and distance ourselves from so many different things that we should all really like have access to and intimately know and understand and live because of gatekeeping and because of not seeing ourselves in spaces and with access to different opportunities and stuff like that. Still navigated all that, still saw and experienced that, but somehow found a way. And I attribute that to, again, the adults in my life, fallible as they are and were, as well as just like my belief in a higher power that has a little bit firmer grasp on things than I feel capable of. I can't like act as though I haven't lived a life despite all the challenges and things like that has been very charmed and very privileged in a lot of really important and impactful ways that now I am benefiting from, but also seeking to kind of undermine and seeking to like kind of work with, right? Like, we're a part of the systems, like it or not. It's a matter of like dismantling them from the inside and leveraging them when, where, and however we can. But I digress. I came down to Tulsa. I came to Tulsa and attended ORU. That's right. Oral Roberts University. First of all, I didn't even know that was a thing. I, in high school, was a part of like Upward Bound, all these like math, science programs, art programs. Like I was in a lot of things, and they postured me, which is very interesting. And I think like I'm from what I've seen now, like we're kind of grooming young people a little bit differently, which is great. But I remember being a part of so many programs that groomed me and prepared me for college acceptance and entrance, without actually preparing me for like knowing what the heck I wanted to do in college. I had all of the the tools and like the resources and the supports like ahead of the game on like FAFSA and like all the forms in like the specialized ACT and SAT testing that like nobody actually like wants to do, but like this is what we're doing, so like we got to do it. And was like, okay, I'm getting the scores, getting the grades, taking the AP classes, doing all the things, but like, what do I want to do? Like, I don't fully know what I want to do. And I mean, I know a lot of adults that still don't necessarily know what they want to do. So there's no way that at 16, 17, when I graduated high school, that I had all of that really like mapped out. And the friends that projected this assurance and that convinced me and themselves and definitely their parents that like this was the path that they were on, they knew that what they wanted to do, and it's like more power to you. Like, I'm going to be exploratory for a while, I think, even though some of these like scholarships and some of this posturing is for a very specific degree or program or what have you. I knew that I wanted to work with art in some capacity. it's interesting because in high school I went to a really, really great school that provided us with way too many like opportunities, and I think part of that is by design, like expose kids to like as much as possible, like, throw some stuff at a wall and like whatever sticks like kind of sticks. But like it was actually overwhelming, right? And in hindsight, had I had a little bit more guidance and specialization, I could have benefited from like early acceptance into certain like art programs and creative avenues and things like that, that like, you know, I mean, the path is the path. I don't regret anything at this point, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it could have been a little bit more fun and I could have had a few less like existential crises, like as a teen, had that been, you know, my journey. That withstanding, like I thought I was going to do, first of all, I had acceptance and, scholarships to like 7 or 8 different HBCUs because you could not tell me that that's not where I was going. I was on that path, on that trajectory. However, I had, and I attribute again like a lot of my success and privilege to this. I had a very healthy, even though, I mean, it was obviously complex and nuanced, active life and experience in church, and being a youth that, you know, did all the things and had, you know, my own relationship with God as I understand God, and prioritized like my faith in such a way that it was very grounding. Also, add to that, my high school graduation present in the form of my little sister was born my senior year of high school, 2 weeks before my grandmother passed away. So there was a lot that I, you know, was navigating as a young person, that my faith was definitely a grounding and in a very like necessary coping mechanism. So that being the case, I didn't want to veer too far from it, and I again had been indoctrinated and sold certain things as it pertains to young people in church, that like if I go to like this school, like I'm probably gonna be a hoe and I'm not gonna have a relationship with God. Well, turns out I can have a relationship with God and be a hoe and do that. Like that's a different conversation for another day. And he really did. Really and truly. Really and truly. Suffice it to say, I found my footing and navigated like a very like rich and wild experience. Like again, despite like growing up having a very like in a very faith-filled family, very like regimented in certain like respects, and there's just like that whole like duty to tradition, to a lot of different things, that I felt like a responsibility and an obligation to kind of like seeing through and prioritizing in a way. And so I did. So very, very last minute, I was like, I think I'm supposed to go to ORU. I don't know. Like, this feels like the move. Yeah. Was all in, found my way down here and was like, oh, this can't be it. Like, this is not Chicago, this is not Michigan, this is not New York, like, this is none of the places that I want to be. And also, I came down here in August, and it was 112 degrees, which was like, what? Like, we're moving into the dorms right now, and like there's a heat advisory. We're not even supposed to be outside doing this. Like, why are we doing this? And it stayed that way for like a record-breaking like 15, 20 days. So I was like, this definitely is not it. Also, I had to, like, it took me 2 years, I want to say. Those of you here, and many of you watching at home, based in Tulsa, understand how our infrastructure is in terms of needing a car. Which camera am I on? Needing a car to get around Tulsa, despite being like relegated to South Tulsa, and like I think the furthest I would go would be like down 71st towards like Woodland and all of that. Like, it took me 2 years to convince my mom that I needed my car down here. her understanding was like, what do you mean? They don't have buses? Mom, this is not Chicago. Like, I've seen buses, but like every hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours between buses. Like, Mom, I'm like not even trying to play you. Like, I really need a vehicle to do this. Eventually, she relented and brought my car down here, and that gave me a little bit more like freedom and access and agency. But while I was in school, a lot of learning, a lot of growing, again, in a very nuanced environment, we'll say that, and found my footing and came into my own. Decided to study psychology, which was something that I knew that I wanted to do prior to matriculating through high school. Like, there was a season when I thought I would, go into like English lit, potentially go into like writing, creative writing, medical illustration, because I was also like on a heavy science path and had this art, and I was like, well, maybe I can just like force these two together. Like, this seems right, but like it wasn't right because it didn't really like fully resonate. It felt like I would still kind of be like settling somehow or making something fit that just seemed inorganic and unnatural. So I studied psychology and did like a bit of like a double minor in business administration and management, and communication arts with an emphasis on acting for music, television, and film, because I was this like singing and dancing little so-and-so. And again, not much has changed. So I moonlighted as like this performer, which was wild. Like a lot of people still don't kind of know this, but like I was doing like regional theater. I was acting in commercials. There are YouTube videos that I have tried to completely wipe from the internet, but it's above my pay grade. I can't remove them. There's footage of this guy doing a lot in terms of like singing and dancing, acting, all the things, some commercials. I was in a lot of like really cool like productions and things. Like, I'm still like a theater kid like through and through. That was one of those things that like I got into it like towards like the end of my high school career, and conductors and directors were like, who are you and why have we not seen you like since you were a freshman, kind of thing. And I was like, well, I mean, I was doing like other things, and again, like in high school, like you can really only do like a couple of things, like, and fully like throw yourself into them. If you're in sports and on teams and stuff like that, like that's your life. If you're in like a few other like extracurriculars, that's also your life. And we still have to be up like and in class before like 7. Like, it's wild. Again, I digress. I wound up graduating, doing the whole. Yeah, there was a lot. I'm skipping over some things, but a lot in terms of figuring it all out. But it all has like informed who I am and how I move through the world and how I create and what is at the center and the heart of that. Upon graduation, was being mentored pretty like quickly by the then program director of the Tulsa Boys Home, for specifically within the substance abuse treatment program. Again, life with a younger sibling that has special needs, there are certain nuanced experiences that, at least from my experience and what I have shared and seen in peers in that space, like there's something about that really like postures you towards like advocacy, towards working in some like helping capacity. Part of that though, like full disclosure, like I had to temper a need to find my value in like how I was somehow helping and how I was somehow always like doing, instead of just being loved for just being me. And so as I navigated that, at that time, I just knew that I wanted to work like with special needs populations, and I knew I had the most experience, I had a heart and still have a heart for it. And it seemed right. Like it seemed like the move. I was told that I would be the perfect candidate to work in this boys' home. And for one, historically, I didn't grow up having like the best relationship with my male peers. Like, I was bullied a lot, and I had a lot of strife with toxic masculinity, with showing up in ways that were always challenged, that there were attempts to like beat that out of me, pray that out of me, all the different things. So it was like, I don't think this is the population that I'm just gonna like jump into and have like their respect. I don't think that they are going to learn from me. I don't think that I'm the person for this. And he was like, you're actually the perfect person for this, for all of those reasons. And I was like, bro, like, this is not, all right, whatever. So I took a chance and wound up really growing in immense ways, specifically in working with teenage boys that were, justice involved, that had a number of, co-occurring experiences, that had, A scores that are just off the charts, a lot of trauma, a lot of things that like I identified with and had shared experiences with, and somehow was so counterculture to what they expected to walk into, the office or to be like facilitating groups and things of that nature. They were just like, who is this guy? Like, you talk different, you look very different, like you move very different. And those nonverbal, all of that nonverbal communication like left me feeling, for one, very insecure, but eventually very equipped to somehow like build rapport in an authentic way that was inherently disarming, because I wasn't who they expected, and because I was someone that they had to experience and they had to sit with and actually like consider internally, like, how am I taking in this person, and why am I so intrigued by this person, and like, who is this person? Like, he's saying like things that like are some of which are like very familiar, some of which are just kind of like, what? Like, who talks like that? Like, your vocabulary, all the different things, like, can you just like say it real simple? And like, no, look it up. You know what I mean? And really just kind of like challenging them to rise to a different occasion. I was also like the youngest of like my peers in this like clinical space. So when I wasn't being confused for like one of the clients, I had like that baked in rapport, because like, you're different, but like, you're also none of them. And they are like, they're older than my parents. Some of them are older than my grandparents. They don't seem to like get it. And you seem to get it in a way that is authentic, that's not pandering, and that's not condescending. Again, going back to like working with youth and understanding and honoring the fact that like, you have experiences that in this moment you may not really be able to articulate in a way that will suffice to all these people assessing your capacity to navigate this. But I will not be challenging your lived experience and in your face disrespect you about like why you don't know to do better or to respond to this differently, when all of these cards have been like literally like stacked against you up until this point. So that was a very, very interesting and again, formative experience. I actually did that work for like 8 years, which is unheard of, first of all, because it's just, as a millennial, like we don't stick with jobs like that, for one. Also, like, there were a number of things that, contributed to that. For one, it was familiar. Also, like, they paid for like my credentialing and all of that in terms of like counseling and whatnot. Also, this being Tulsa, like, I was able to have this whole other life, which I did in terms of like the performance and the art and like all these different things. So I kind of passively created a fork in the road at that point. One of the reasons why that was so foundational and so impactful was because I was in the position to help people navigate life, which beckons like sitting with really, really tough questions not always having answers, having to look inwardly, and then being tasked with actually like modeling that, because I can't tell this young person, hey, you need to really think critically about like these choices that you're making now and how they will impact you a few months from now, years from now, all that, without actually like doing that as well. And then, like it or not, like being able to see that and to read that. So I became a little bit more transparent with the work that I was doing outside of work, which included acting and singing and the whole like band and like all the different things, which only made them more intrigued about like who I was as a person, because I was obviously projecting and showing up and having very necessary boundaries like in this clinical capacity, but was so much more than who I was allowing to be, perceived most of the time in this space. They at a certain point challenged me to lean into that. They were like, yo, Mr. A, you're always telling us that we need to follow our dreams, that we need to like really invest in ourselves and do the things that like make us happy, or like that fulfill us and nurture us, but like why are you still here? Because like you could be doing more than what you're doing here. And we see that. Like, I mean, the kids that we're around are always, they don't necessarily like have the most tact, but like they see it and they will definitely speak on it. And I, was fortunate enough to have that relationship with these young people that they were like, yo, are you gonna take your own advice, or are you just gonna keep talking about us making these moves? And the respectful disrespect that I navigated in that was very, very impactful, and was very real, because it's like, damn, like, first of all, thank you for listening, but also like, y'all are really like watching. And I mean, I know I owe it to myself, but I think I also owe it to you all, and just given most of our inclination to do things more for other people than for ourselves, so be it. Like, maybe I do need to do this, and maybe I do need to do this so that since you're watching, you can see that this is possible. During my tenure, I started, doing some exhibitions. Like my very first like group exhibition was actually for the nude erotic art event that happens annually. It seemed like something that was like so diametrically opposed to like who I was in most public spaces, but like everybody has a freak flag, so I was like, this is actually my vibe, y'all just don't know that. So I was like, I'm gonna seize this opportunity and paint some freaky stuff, and like lean in and enjoy this expressive like moment. That, as with anything, like led to more and more opportunities. It led to impactful and important relationships that I have since kind of nurtured and been able to leverage in this like art career. So towards the end of my tenure, I found myself in this position where it was like, yo, I'm thinking really critically about the life that I'm curating for myself, the experiences that I want for myself, and ways in which that I want to show up in my community that aren't necessarily as much of a detriment to me. Like, it's great to do the work, it's great to like make an impact, but like at what cost? And that was something that I was like, damn, like I really want to do great work, but like I don't want to be as burnt out and disgruntled as some of my like colleagues in this space seem. Like, you don't seem happy, like you're doing like impactful work and things like that, but like like you're not a joy to be around, you don't seem to like being around you, like all these different things. And I'm like, man, I gotta find a way to be sustained by what I'm passionate about. And one of the main plumb lines throughout my life has been art. And it just seemed more and more tangible the more chances I took leaning into it, in terms of, doing shows, following up on people that are like, yo, like I saw you like did this piece or whatever, like could I hire you to do something? I mean, it's like really flattering for somebody to see you and believe in you and say like, wow, I want something from you that you've created because you seem really like creative. But like, how many times do we actually like follow through? And prior to really like leaning into that, it was literally just validating and affirming enough that somebody even wanted some of my work. Actually, like moving beyond what I would at times like just treat as like lip service to putting action behind it and saying like, well, okay, let me like take this seriously and actually sit down and have a real conversation with them about the art that they want for their space or for their home. And like, if they're really willing to like pay me for this, like maybe I'll like get paid and actually have fun getting paid. So, I just started leaning into those opportunities, and I am a firm believer in manifestation and in prayer, in being intentional about the relationships and the choices that we make and how they inform our trajectory, right? Like, I've done a lot of study and have been exposed to resiliency and watching firsthand how people navigate the diverse circumstances that they are presented with, good, bad, or completely like neutral. In my own life, I wish I, knew and could just kind of like bottle it and say, look, this is how you thrive and this is how you succeed. Everybody's path is completely different. And the nuance of our journeys are so beautifully, like distinctly ours, but also shared experiences. Because I love how, especially being in a place like Tulsa, how completely interwoven our lives are. I mean, that sometimes gets old real quick because our social and professional circles are so concentric, and it's like, okay. But there's such a beauty and a real like micro example of a real like macro phenomenon at how interwoven and how interconnected we really all are. And as a result, like how consequential your thriving is for me, right? Like the ways in which you show up for yourself impact the ways I show up for myself. And the art that we create for ourselves, for each other, with each other, all of that. And I don't even mean like specifically like visual art. I just mean like the art of our living and of the expression of our experiences. Like that's really beautiful, and that's very, very interconnected in a way that the profundity of that only increases the more I live this out and the more that I kind of like navigate this. So January 14th, 2019 was my last day. 2018? Yeah, was my last day like working for anybody else, and can't imagine not doing that. Like I know it's as cliche as it is, people are like, man, I should have did this sooner. Nah, that stuff is very real. It's very, very real and also very attainable. One of my dearest friends in Maggie Burnside gifted me this book called The Crossroads of Should and Must. Highly, highly recommend. I've literally like given that book away and have championed that book multiple times. I'm like, yo, you just got to read this book. It's a very easy read, but it's also one of those reads that it is important to read regularly, because as we move through life and as we navigate these experiences, there's something very grounding about taking time to stand at the crossroads of what we feel like we should do versus what we feel like we must do in terms of who we were designed to be, how we feel compelled and empowered to show up in spaces and in communities, and the vehicles by which we navigate all of that. Like that is just like a very regular, necessary read, because that shifts as we move through life and as we grow. That book was major. I think that book, I'm pretty sure, was like one of like the major, like that kind of like one of the major linchpins that like sealed the deal for me in terms of like leaving the safety and the security, the quote unquote security of, having a job, and a regular like paycheck. But I didn't realize that I could still find security and still find sustenance and thriving in art and through doing something that I felt like passionate about and sustained by. Again, I've been very, very privileged to have had some amazing opportunities literally just like handed to me. I still feel as though they were earned. I may not have necessarily had to like compete for them or submit like proposals or things for them, but I have worked tirelessly to show up and to become the person that could meet that moment and to be the artist that has the capacity, has the work ethic, has the understanding and the relationships to achieve those desired outcomes. So I'm very, very grateful again for the community that I have found here in Tulsa, which honestly, like I chided for a long time because this was not Chicago, this wasn't anywhere else. And without going like too deep into the very checkered history of Tulsa, as a transplant, there was an aspect that felt very sinister and felt very like, whoa, like energetically. And I believe a lot of that, has to do with, the ways in which Black Wall Street and our indigenous community have not been honored, all those different things. Like that's recognizable from someone who's not from this community, who didn't necessarily have like all the context, was like, yo, like there's something very weird here. And there's a very real, palpable, like racial tension that I wasn't used to or anticipating or expecting to navigate, that I didn't really know who to talk to about it, but it was definitely something that like as I became grafted into this community and as I also became like made that transition with other transplants that are also like, yeah, this is kind of like there's something different here. I don't know what it is, but like this, I have so much love for this community, but I have so many questions about like why this community is the way this community is, that seems so dramatically different than anywhere else that I've experienced, and have like these really like glaring like idiosyncrasies that we know from historical context happen very similarly in a lot of different communities, in a lot of different spaces, but there's just something very specific about the exact shade of red that, covers this ground. You know what I mean? That's just like, you live it and you experience it in a very like visceral way. So like a lot of that is like origin story. Nowadays, I'm really, really privileged to do like some really, really great work with some amazing people that I'm actively doing life with, that I'm also doing like really, really great and impactful work with. And we made it up. Like we're literally like that's the beauty of it. Like you can actually curate, and you are responsible for curating your own happiness and your own like success and an environment wherein like you thrive. That seems like such a novel and like far-fetched concept when you are anywhere but like centered in that. And having found my way to that place, having been ushered and stewarded into that place by people that have prayed for me, people that have checked and challenged me, people that have demanded that of me, has me very centered in this space of gratitude and of like tremendous like access and influence. Like I have always said, like, it's one of the things that Tulsa has had a history of doing and people have contributed to is like our own like othering and using other cities and other spaces as the barometer for our success. And like, we're not the Austin of Oklahoma. We could never be that. Like, that's not our responsibility. But because we've postured ourselves in such a way, I have like very like well-meaning friends and family that have been like, you're in Tulsa? But like, why? Like, you're so talented. Like, you should be in New York or LA. And that was something that I internalized for a while and had to like navigate. But I'm like, no, I'm in Tulsa and I fuck with Tulsa. I love Tulsa. You know what I mean? But there is something to be said of posturing in such a way that externalizes potential and what like success actually looks like. Because success is not a physical address. Like it's just not that. Right? And there's no guarantee that being in a larger, more competitive market with its own nuances, that I would experience the type of thriving that I have here, that I think is so uniquely specific to Tulsa that there's no way that this seems to like be even possible anywhere else. But yeah, so I'm like really, really grateful. I'm sure like time is probably like out. I don't know, close to.
We got like 5 minutes.
Oh, look at that.
We actually have some wonderful questions from online.
Oh, snap. Okay.
That I was going to ask you, and then we can kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
Let's see. So one of the first questions
Honey.
is, in what ways has your art evolved with your own evolution?
Whew, that's great.
You need more time.
In what? No, I can actually sum that up pretty quickly. So the way art kind of works, or anything works, right? Like, I think it inherently grows with you, right? So, like, you learn how to do something, and you may be feebly attempting it initially, but as you become a little bit more experienced and sophisticated in doing that, like, that process, like, streamlines. So I liken that to like art. On a technical level, I have improved as I have sought to improve, and I have you just keep like doing more work, and you just kind of like get better and more efficient at doing certain work. I've also grown like as a person, so a better version of me shows up to the canvas than did, years ago, weeks ago, yesterday. You know what I mean? If I'm doing this right, like I'm actively working to be better and to show up differently. I will also say I've engaged in my healing and in my growth journey in a way that has been very consequential to my health, my mental and spiritual health, and has to impact my work, right? Like I feel like I've adjusted my posture and my identity and in the way that I show up in community and in spaces. And as a result, like that translates in my work and in the type of work I do, the mediums that I do. Like I never thought I was going to be pole dancing and ever considered the expressiveness of that, and in terms of artistry and all. Grew up in church, went to ORU. That was not actually on the curriculum. Not a real not a poppin' extracurricular back then. But definitely something that I have seen so much growth, lived and experienced growth, and also it just makes me that much more like dynamic and well-rounded. And so I consider different narratives and different experiences because of the relationships that I have developed in that space and in that community and through that like form of art.
So we'll take one more question, and for the rest of the questions, we'll
just chill.
We'll just chill, and we can hop on the live. Alex, later if you feel like kind of engaging with some of the people that have commented on the live on Instagram and Facebook, Alex can jump on there. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to ask one more question. But thank you guys for asking all these wonderful questions. One of the last question I want to ask is, if you had to create in monochromatic schemes, which color would you use?
Ooh. Well, I've done that before. That really kind of depends on the mood of the piece and like the feel of it. Green is my favorite color. I've done some monochromatic stuff that have all been like blues and stuff like that. But I might do something in like pinks. Yeah, just because I haven't seen too many. Like, certain monochromatic palettes are pretty common. Like, we've seen, like, blue periods, and we've seen a lot of, like, reds. Not so much greens terribly often unless it's, like, a landscape or, like, an outdoor kind of situation. But I like pink. I like the softness of it. I also like the electricity of it and, like, the vibrant, like, neons and things like that. So maybe I will, like, work on a piece that kind of marries those.
I want to scoot next to you as we close.
Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone for joining in online. Wonderful questions, wonderful engagement online, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
We have people here. This is an important space for us to create. Can we give Alex a round of applause? Sharon.